So we're here with Representative Kenney. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and do an interview for the Seattle Civil Rights and Labor History Project. So we'll start off with just a simple question. Where were you born and where were you raised?
Well, I was I was born in Hardin, Montana. My parents came from Mexico in 1919, and there were 8 of us, brothers and sisters, and we were all born in different states. We were migrant farm workers. And my mother tells me I was a sugar beet baby because that's what they worked in Montana. And so I was born in Montana, then moved to, I was lucky, I was next to the youngest. And we moved to Washington State when I was 5. And in those days, they called it settling out, and so they settled out in Wapato. And that was our first, say, more permanent home. So I was raised in Eastern Washington.
Now, what are some early memories growing up? I know you were born in, you were raised in the Valley, but then later on you transitioned over to the Tri-Cities.
Right. I lived in the Tri-Cities 21 years before moving to Seattle. In '76, I moved to Seattle. This is where I live now. But my early memories on
growing up here in Washington.
When we moved to Wapato, we still worked in the fields, of course, and so I started working in the fields when I was 5. And my job was what they called the vine shaker in the potato fields. And in those days, they would dig out the potatoes the old-fashioned way. They would dig them up from the ground, and they'd be on the rows. But the potatoes would still be sticking on the vine. And the people that were picking the potatoes would have a belt with 2 big hooks on it, and you put a gunny sack on it. And they dragged the sack between their legs, and then they picked the potatoes this way. So in order for my brother to pick faster and make more money, I would go in front of him and shake the vines so that the potatoes were ready to be put into the sack. And we'd go out very early in the morning. We would come home and then go back later in the afternoon because you can't leave the potatoes out or the sun would bake them, on the field. So they have to do it in the early morning or in the afternoon. And but that was our, my brother and I were lucky because my younger brother, because we got to go to school, which is something my older brothers and sisters got very little of, although they did very well in life. And so we'd go to school, come back, go out to the fields, and then we picked some other crops, but I always say I was lucky in one respect. I couldn't pick hops, because I was allergic to either the pesticide or the hop itself, and I'd break out in a huge rash. But that's another subject, pesticides. So those things, but the other positive was that we had a house. We had a house, and so when I went to school, and they asked me for my address or where I lived, I could honestly put an address that was true, and so it was nice in that respect that we were able to get some stability and to say, we live here, we're part of the community, and I, by being in school and so forth, I thought, yes, maybe I can fit in and belong.
Now, where did you go to middle school and high school at?
Wapato. And then I went to Toppenish 2 years and then moved to the Tri-Cities.
In Toppenish, you went to a community college? Or?
No, I attended community college in the Tri-Cities and then took some courses from WSU, who has always had an extension. Now, of course, they have the 4-year institution, of which I played a big part in.
And then there at the WSU extension in Tri-Cities, what did you study? And then
No, I just took general course, yeah, but never finished.
Okay. Then moving there into what year did you move into the Tri-Cities, and then how did you start getting
54.
getting involved in community work? 'Cause I know you participated in the migrant council, right?
Well, yes, we started the early childhood education daycare centers for migrant children in 1960. Gosh, we started them in 66 as a volunteer program. A group of us. It was called the Latino Association, and we did volunteer work. And we opened the first one in not Mattawa, in Ephrata, and we would volunteer and run the daycare for parents. And so then we formed the Washington Citizens for Migrant Affairs and got federal funding for daycares throughout Eastern Washington, which now it's called Inspire, but it's changed names a lot. You know, it was the Washington Citizens for Migrant Affairs, and then it was Northwest Rural Opportunities, and then Washington Citizens for Migrant Affairs again, and then now it's Inspire. And so did that, and then we worked on getting with Tomas Villanueva and getting the Farm Workers Health Clinic started there too. And then another one that I'm founder of is called the Educational Institute for Rural Families, which is in Pasco and still operating.
So what got you really motivated, inspired to help the farm worker community? Because you've been involved in a lot of different efforts too.
Yes. Well, involved because being a farm worker, but, you know, also doing some I was very active in the church, in the Catholic Church in the Tri-Cities. So we did a lot of things during harvest for them and to help. And then when I entered the legislature in 1997, I was appointed. In 98, I had to run. But when I entered the legislature, they had only given $2 million for farm worker housing in an industry that makes billions of dollars in this state, and on the backs of migrant farm workers. And so when I left a year and a half ago, we had put in 137 million, but that still isn't enough, you know. And we had also included the farmers so that they could have, you know, some responsibility and ownership to providing something on their farm. You know, we're having a lot of trouble up north with one of the farmers over there on housing and other, farm worker rights issues. And so it's not ending, but at least we've improved.
And then, so from the Tri-Cities, what was the year that you actually ended up moving over to Seattle?
In 76, November of 76, I moved to Seattle to take a job over here.
What was that job that moved over to?
Well, it was with the State Employment Security Department, but it was a special program that funding they had received from the Funds for the Improvement of Post-Secondary Education, FIPSE. And FIPSE had never before funded a state agency for any kind of educational program. This was their first, and it was for ex-offenders to have them go to school, to go to a university or college. And so that's what I came over to start that, to develop that program, and worked there for a number of years at Employment Security Department. And when I left there, I was Assistant Commissioner for Employment Security. And but the program that we started received national recognition, and they only FIPSE, as you know, just funds for 2 years, but they gave us a dissemination grant for 2 years. So we disseminated the program because we developed our curriculum from scratch to 10 different states and 10 different regions in the United States. And it wasn't used just for offenders. In Flagstaff, Arizona, it was used for Native American at-risk youth. In Georgia, it was used for high school. So it had different, it was applied differently. So the programs are still running in many of the states. So it's been a good program. So that was one of the things that I did at Employment Security. And then I also did the transition from CETA to the next era, whatever it was. I can't even remember what it was called after that. And I did the transition at the state level.
And then, how'd you get involved more with electoral politics? I know you were appointed to your district first, right?
Well,
And how'd that come about?
I have to tell a story, you know, because we always say that we grow on the shoulders of other people, of great people, and my dad was very political. And he went to the seminary in Mexico for 8 years to study because he was from a poor family. He never had any intentions of being a priest, but he wanted to get an education. And was very, very articulate. And at the camps, when we lived in the camps, in the different areas, he was always kind of the leader, watching out for the workers, making sure that they weren't treated badly. He was also the doctor, the minister, and everything else there in the camp. And so he was very active in his own right, and so I learned a lot of that from him on giving back to the community, and that we need to have our voices heard and also be the voices for others. And so he was, and my mother was a very true role model as well, because she helped a lot. She just did so much for the communities. And I have to say that we had the first Mexican restaurant in Wapato and Topnish, and my sister had the first Mexican restaurant in Seattle. That was where the Sheraton now sits. When the Sheraton bought the land, all the businesses had to move. But so we have some history too in economic development and entrepreneurship in the state. And my brother ran the restaurant in Topnish for years and years. People still remember him. So, but we've learned to give back to the community. And it's too bad that we didn't record some of the history of our parents and grandparents in this state, because a group of men called La Honorifica Mexicana started the organization in Wapato and Topnish, and they established the celebration for Las Fiestas Patrias, 15th and 16th of September in the valley, with parades and everything. And that was years ago. I mean, that was many years ago. They were very instrumental in bringing Danny Rios, who was the first Mexican baseball player that came to play for the Bears in Yakima. We have pictures, and kind of exciting. And so, I mean, there's a lot of history we missed.
And so
I went off the...
No, you're fine. That's great. So your father's activism really motivated you to get involved into politics yourself.
I started in the Tri-Cities with the church, working with the church and as a volunteer, and then became a precinct committee officer there. The Tri-Cities used to be all Democratic at one time, so it was very active. And then when I moved to Seattle, I became active in the district as well and continued to do that. In 1996, I ran for Secretary of State. I never ran for office before, and I don't know what got into me to run for office against a very prominent Republican, well-liked Republican, and I said, we're just going to have to do it, you know. And I got 40% of the vote and stayed white, which wasn't bad, but still, you know. And then they asked me in the 46th district if I would consider to, excuse me, if I would consider going for the appointment. Ken Jacobson moved to the Senate, and there was an opening in the House, if I'd consider going for that appointment. And at first I said, no, I just came off of a big statewide race. I'm not sure I'm up to another one, because I'd have to run in '98. But I did. And no offense to anybody, but I had 7 men running against me for the appointment. You might remember. And I beat him at the end 2-1, but I was appointed and then ran and for 8 times and won every time with very high percentage.
What was it like running for that first time to get appointed? I mean, were you traveling throughout the state, and what was the response?
Well, for the Secretary of State, you mean?
Or actually, yeah, for that.
Because the district is just district.
Yeah, for the Secretary of State, I mean, what was that experience like?
Well, it was great because I had a good base too, because I was also very involved in community colleges and education, and so I had base there, and I had base in other community groups that were statewide recognized, and but it was wonderful. And I think one of my great memories is what we called On the Road Again, when Clinton and Gore were running the second time, and we had 4 women that were in state offices. We had the Attorney General, Gregoire, and then we had the Natural Resources, we had the Insurance Commissioner, there were Deborah Sin, there were a lot of women in office at the state level. And I was invited to go with them and Governor Locke on the road trip they took, what they call the back road, with Clinton and Gore and Tipper and Hillary and others. And that was one of the greatest experiences I had. I loved it. It was very memorable. And to see people behind the scenes and how really wonderful they were, even though they were the president and vice president. And it was just a very, very, very good educational and inspiring trip for me. So I think that was part of it, that, saying, well, if I want to make a change, how do I make a change? It's not for being in office or being elected isn't for everybody. But you can do it other ways. You can be involved and make a change and be a real instrument for change, a real agent for change. But I thought for me would be to get elected. And when I was asked to run for Secretary of State again after Ralph Monroe quit, I made a decision to stay in the House of Representatives because I felt I could make more of an impact in laws and budget. And so I did that. And I feel very good that I've left a good legacy for farm workers, for our communities as a whole, and especially the Latino community, and for education. And I could talk about a lot of those programs that are in existence now. But
how was that experience running for the first time for the district reps? I know you said you were running against.
Well, it was different, and it was interesting. But we have a very good district, which is always good. And so, always the first time, it's very intense, and you have to do this and that and the other. But it felt good, and I felt very comfortable. I had a lot of support. And the key to anything, too, is to have family support. You have to have that. And I had that with my husband, who was very much involved in labor and was very instrumental with Governor Lowry at the time to get health care for farm workers and to get the minimum wage for farm workers. And so I had a lot of support in all of the issues that I wanted to pursue.
I mean, pioneer a lot of different ways. You're the first Latina representative. What was that like to be, one of the first representatives?
Well, we had one other representative in the House. She moved to the Senate. So I know people think, I'm not going to go into it, but it's hard. It's not easy. It's not always easy because you always feel you have to work a little harder. You have to prove yourself more than, say, a white male representative or even a white woman, to be honest with you. And so it was hard at first, and you have to establish yourself. And I have to say that I never backed down. There's bills that were passed that I didn't get passed the first time around, but didn't give up, and we did it the second time. But it's frustrating also that we have to do that we always have to feel like we have to go that extra 2 miles to get what we need when others don't. So, but it was good, and I've always chaired or co-chaired. When I went into the House in 98, it was, the first session was 98, we were in the minority. The Democrats were in the minority. And Frank Chop really worked hard, as everybody, and the next year we were tied. And we were tied for 3 years. So there's co-chairs of everything. I was co-chair of higher education, and I've always, in my 16 years in the House, I was also on the Ways and Means Committee and other committees, on the Labor Committee as well. But and then we gained majority, of which we still are to this day. I hope it stays that way. So it was, and I've chaired a committee my whole time in my 16 years. And I had, the last one was economic development, community and economic development and housing. And then I chaired higher ed for 8 years.
During your time there as a representative, what are you most proud of? What are the major accomplishments that you think you push forward?
Well, let me begin by saying that one of the great benefits was meeting all the wonderful people, not only in the legislature, but in the communities that have the same concerns, that are the same issues, they have the same vision, they want the community to be better for them, their children, and their grandchildren. And that was one of the gratifying effects of it, because a legislator doesn't do it alone. You can't do it alone. You have to have that whole organizations behind you to get something done. But in passed Bill 1079, which gave students, undocumented students, a right to in-state tuition. We did opportunity grants, and none of these passed on the first time around, by the way. The second time around. Did opportunity grants, which is mostly in the community colleges, but is a really avenue to four-year education. And that is a wraparound program for students. So it's not just covering their tuition, but transportation and equipment and everything they might need to succeed for low income. And it's a nationally recognized program. Then we had, the other one was another program called iBest. iBest takes students that don't speak English and teaches them English and a trade at the same time. And excuse me, that way they can start work at a faster rate. And that's also, it started out with Rogelio Riojas from CMAR coming to me and saying, we can't get CNAs, certified nursing assistants, in our nursing homes and for our home care because they don't speak English and they can't pass the test. So I said, well, we have to do something about it. And we started it at South Seattle Community College, where they could learn English and learn the test and go through all of the things that they needed to go to prepare them. And of 30 that started, 28 passed. So, and that led, of course, and some of those nurses, CNN nurse, they went to LPNs, licensed practical nurses, and some of them now are RNs. So it's opening the door, not just to what they're, starting out with. And then it was such a successful program that they extended it to other trades and programs and became national because the Gates Foundation has put money into it to disseminate it nationally, and they've received federal funding here in the state through the community colleges to disseminate it nationally. And I'm very proud to say that the President of the United States has mentioned it twice in his educational speeches as a model program, and which is good. I think the other one is the four-year colleges, the branch, what we call the branch campuses, I worked very hard on that one to get that one going, and then becoming 4-year, from 2-year to 4-year. And we did that, and then we did, I did a bill that took 2 sessions as well. It's called the recording fee for a real estate transaction to put in, to pay an extra fee, and the money goes in for the homeless and brings in about 63 million. And that was that's when you really have to get the whole community and all segments of it together to agree and to support you and to do this. But I'm very proud of that. And that's operating. We hope to make it permanent. I say, but I'm just working on the outside. So it's, I mean, those are some, and of course the farm worker housing, low-income housing is another one that's very near and dear to my heart, and the achievement gap for our young people. And then we still keep working on it. It finally passed last year. I wasn't in the legislature, but state needs grant for undocumented students, which we worked hard because we passed the Bill 1079 in state tuition in 2003. So it took us all that time to get to the point that we got to this year.
What was the evolution of that? Because you passed HB 1079. And then it's a while before you get state need grant. I mean, what type of dynamics was there going on?
A lot of educating the public, especially, our educators and parents. And it still, has a lot of controversy in certain areas of the state. But it really did. It took educating and hearing the stories of the students and doing that, because we talk about that we lack 4-year degree in engineering and other areas here in this state. We bring in Microsoft, Amazon, and others bring in people to work to fill the jobs that they say they can't find people here to do it. And I feel we need to do something, because we have students now that are graduating from universities that can fill those jobs. And we need to find a way so that they can have those working visas to stay and work and fill those jobs. Because right now we're on a very short string with Obama's 2-year executive order of where they will, can at least, with certain regulations, stipulations, they can stay and get a number and work and continue. But what happens if that goes away? And so we need to think about that very, very now, not wait, but now.